Hey guys, how's it going? On this video I will be talking about the new science fiction movie The Vast of the Night, which premiered at festivals last year, Sundance in particular, and it's now available on Amazon Prime if you have Amazon. It went up there on Friday, so getting a full release now, a year after screening at festivals. So yes, this is a really intriguing new science fiction movie. It's from a first-time directing team, so a debut feature, and it's set in New Mexico, and the New Mexico of the 1950s, which of course is a classic science fiction location. And you got these two central characters who are like both work in the town, both know each other. You have Faye, who's a 16-year-old local girl. She works in like a control center or a call center that patches through calls. I think it's like run by the family, so she kind of helps out there. And then at the same time, you also have her sort of friend or associate, whichever term you want to use, and he is Everett, and he's a little bit older, but he works at the local like radio station, does a nighttime show there playing classic tunes, and they sort of strike up this sort of friendship. And one night, when Faye's like helping out, working at her job, there's like an interference in her like transmission. She hears like these weird sort of distorted sounds, and she contacts Everett at the station, and they find out then the sounds kind of interfered with like his transmission, his program as well, and they start getting more information and things slowly fall into place. And of course we're heading towards a UFO style plot where there may or may not be aliens in the town. And there's a couple of different like people claiming that the sound they heard on the radio was related to UFOs. And that's kind of how the story unfolds. It's a very, very low budget film. It's very about the ideas, about the suspense, about kind of the location. I think it's really sort of low key, and I think it's all the best for that. It's largely about the relationship between the two characters, but also I think just about the themes of technology and just the ideas behind that, the concept, and how they play an important role in kind of small town life, and just how they link that to kind of classic like pulpy science fiction. Because there's this interesting framing device where effectively they frame it as a story that's on TV, so like one of these classic anthology type things, either like one of these films they do, or more like maybe an anthology type on TV where it's a different story each week. And that's kind of the vast of the night of the title. And so you actually have like a film within a film sort of thing, or a story within a story. So for most of the film it just flows as if you're watching the characters, and as if it's like authentic, but occasionally it will draw back from that, and you will see them like within the TV screen, and it's a really old-fashioned TV obviously from this era. Yeah, really a lot of crackles, and it does pull back every now and again. So I think that's obviously deliberate. I think it's a film that is very nostalgic and has fondness for that kind of like old-fashioned sort of storytelling, that sort of throwback sort of science fiction type kind of story or show. But also the technology, I think, is key. The sort of like commentary on technology, and that becomes a recurring theme throughout, because we see the character of Faye get like a tape recorder, and it's such a big deal to her, and that is such a 50s thing, because of course at this point that sort of technology was not common, and I think when people see it, that it's something that's unique, and I think that's something that's hard to imagine now, because we're so used to technology advancing and moving so fast, and all these snazzy like new advices or devices. So it's kind of hard to imagine like a tape recorder just being this like unique sort of thing. But there's something like really like sweet about Faye, the fact that she just has this hunger, this fascination to just learn about technology, and just get involved and use it. There's a real like enthusiasm about her, this kind of wide-eyed sort of innocence, because I think that's part of like the relationship with Everett, the fact that he's a bit older, he's a bit more, he's got, he's not, he's like a younger guy, he's like early 20s, I think, maybe 19, but he's got a few years on her. And I mean, working at the radio station, he obviously knows a bit about technology. So I think he obviously helps her out with the tape recorder. And I think we see she sort of fancies herself as a bit of like a budding sort of journalist. And like kind of the first, like the opening chunk of the film is just really interesting, because it's just like this really fast-paced sort of tracking shot that sweeps kind of around this because it starts at a basketball game, and it just throws you into it sort of thing, and we see the characters, and like for some reason Everett's like got he talks to someone in the crowd, and he like chucks him down like a trombone or something, and I still have no idea what he wanted the trombone for. And then Faye's with him, or he calls her down, and they're obviously gonna, because she's got this tape recorder, so they're gonna like kind of interview people for the local news maybe, or I think it's just for her own personal use, but I think he's just showing her the tricks of the trade, which is quite sort of funny, and she's, as I said, she's just so enthusiastic. But this immediately throws you into like the energy, I think, of the town, because there's a funny little thing, because Everett is like actually there to fix like they've been having some sort of like signal problem at the game, like it must be like the scoreboard or something like that in like this like gymnasium where it's being held, which is a nice little like setup for later on, because obviously when all this stuff happening around town, you can kind of see it starting here. But there's quite a funny little joke where first of all we find out that it's the wrong guy, like her husband, the woman, she didn't want it, like it's another name beginning with E, so it wasn't Everett she wanted. But it's sort of funny because she's talking about all these different like instances they've had where like the electricity's gone out or the power's gone out, and it's involved like sort of different like animals like biting into the cables. Just pretty funny stuff. But yeah, I think first of all, I really like this film. I think it's a little bit of a gem. I could really see it becoming a cult favourite. It's very distinct, and I think a lot of it is to do with the style and the way it just carries it, and the relationship between the characters is really kind of like charming as well. But yeah, first things first, I think aesthetically it really captures the time period. It really has this everything from like the costumes. I mean, Faye has like these massive sort of like 50s style glasses, which are almost like almost could be like binoculars or kind of something. But just like this kind of thing where it's like she constantly has a fascination, and it's like this sort of device where she's like paying such close attention. Um, but yeah, the costumes and the hair, that it's just so classic 50s. Um, but yeah, just the overall look of the town, and just the tilt of like the visuals and the colouring. Very sort of distinct, very sort of clever, very provocative, I think, of the time period. Um, but yeah, it is one of these films because it starts off at this really kinetic, sort of frenetic sort of pacing when where you're tracking the characters, and really fast paced sort of screwball style dialogue. And I think that worried me at first. I thought, I hope this film is going to slow down because it could wear me out like within half an hour of this. Not that I didn't like what it was doing, but I think if it carried on at a similar pace throughout, it might overwhelm me. But luckily, it does kind of slow down. But yeah, the look of the thing is really kind of beautiful, and it has a distinct kind of look. The only thing is, I think at times, because obviously a lot of it, like the whole thing, is set over one night, and I think particularly when they're outdoors, I think some of those shots, which is probably just to do with how low budget it is, but they do look very dark. Sometimes it's hard to like pick out the characters or to follow them. That's maybe a slight complaint, but it's not something that bothered me a lot because it's just a restriction on the budget, and I think it really doesn't matter because this film has like kind of a good sort of concept behind it, and it very much is less is more. As I said, it's about the themes and the ideas and the relationship. And yeah, there's a lot of sparky dialogue. I think, as I said, Faye's just really charming and delightful. I think she just has this like curiosity and this nervous sort of energy about her. And they're both very natural. That they've got really great chemistry. I think with Everett, there was a danger that he might come off as a bit too cocky. I sort of thought that in like the first scene a little bit, but I think it was partly to just compliment like Faye a bit. So they were kind of sort of opposites, but they also have this connection. And I think over the course of the film we see then there is a more like down to earth sort of subtle side to Everett. It's just that he's like the more naturally sort of confident and kind of suave one. I don't know if suave's the right word, but that kind of thing. And we kind of sense that Faye has a little bit of a crush on him, because that gets mentioned at some point. But I think another thing is just talking on the technology front. The fact that they obviously work in like technological like jobs, and I think particularly with Everett working at the radio station, I think this film is really exploring this thing of like public service broadcasting, and kind of what an important part that plays in like a small local town. Just as someone who obviously is, I've volunteered on local radio and stuff, and the kind of connection you can build up with the audience. But also in this, because that's where the mystery starts unfolding, because they obviously hear these sounds that are interfering in the broadcast. And then Everett kind of like appeals to the audience to, if there's anyone who has any information, anyone who knows what the sounds might be, and like one of the funniest gags, because there's not that many gags, but there are some like well placed sort of like humor in there, and one is that he kind of promises like a rug that belongs to Elvis. No, it's a piece of carpet that belonged to Elvis apparently, if someone comes forward. And it's one of those like sort of cheesy little things that radio stations, you can imagine, that they give away as part of like a promotion or something. And as soon as that came out of his mouth, I knew, yeah, that's not true. It's not Elvis. It's like carpet. And it's something Faye kind of believes. It's like, so you're going to give him a bit of Elvis's carpet? And he's like, no, it's not Elvis carpet. I mean, a while back we did have some, but we sold all of it. But yeah, that's great stuff. That's really good sort of humour. But yeah, as I was saying, I think the role of radio or the DJ as this voice, like connecting the public, and just especially these times, I think there's something so striking, so kind of distinct, about that kind of, that figure, that sort of public service figure. And so I think that's one of the great like ideas behind this film is just the fact that it's all about technology. It's all about I don't know, just static, just about how kind of distinct and how important like sound and just little details of the technology is around this time, and how you can really use that and kind of link it to like a UFO style plot. And it gives this very straightforward sort of structure where it just plays out, and it leads to some really low key sort of suspenseful sort of scenes. But there's some really nice visual tricks. I think although the story itself is quite straightforward, then some of the techniques are really unique and quite different. It does sort of have, as I said, the story's quite straightforward, but the mood and the atmosphere and just some of like the camera techniques are really very different, and does give it this more sort of off kilter sort of feel. So just to pick out a couple of scenes, there's this really stunning like just tracking shot where obviously after Faye and Everett have talked, and they've obviously kind of established and there's something like freaky going on, and it's just after when he's like announced over the air or like kind of asked if anyone has information on the sound, any idea what it is, to come forward. You get this tremendous like long shot where it literally, like the camera literally flies out of like the door where Faye is at her work, and it goes all the way like through the town into like the gymnasium where the basketball game is, and just flies out like the other window and into it like Everett's like radio station. So it's like we're literally following like this unknown kind of sound, and just like the rumbling as well. It's actually like really suspenseful. That's another thing about this film. It is very less is more, but they really come up with like these unique sort of visual and atmospheric moments. It's a really atmospheric film. Some very like hypnotic sort of use of music and I don't know, sort of ambient type sound as well. I think the use of sound is like very kind of disjointed and jumbled, but it's just seeing these faces, seeing like first of all Faye and then Everett just like listening in or watching, just very, very focused. And I think the film also uses like that sort of like kind of fractured sort of technology as a way to sort of build and add suspense too, because at one point when Everett's talking to this character Billy, who's the guy who like phones in the radio station, and he has a particular story claiming that the sound is UFO related, then at one point like the sound like or the telephone call cuts out, and so I think that adds like this new sort of suspense where it's like he's like giving them information and we're like listening to the information sort of as the characters receive it, and then suddenly the call cuts out and it's like this extra bit of drama because they were obviously getting towards like information. But yeah, I think this film is all the more impressive just for like building the tension like that. As I said, really great period detail. Another one of the visual techniques I really like is then a couple of different times when you're hearing like Everett talking to this guy on the radio, like the screen just goes to black and we just hear like the crackling and we hear like them talking to each other on the radio, and again it just puts us in that position where we have to rely on like the sound rather than the actual visual, so like we are like listening on a radio. So that's a brilliant moment as well, along with, as I said, that tracking shot. Another thing I think is really good about the film, which I've already touched on a bit, but is then they sort of work in like the politics of the era really nicely. I think you really get a sense of this very kind of paranoid town and just what was going on in the culture at the time. But it is quite subtle the way that works in. It's not like sort of, it doesn't like hit you over the head with it. It feels like quite a natural part of the story. And there's quite a logic to it because, for example, at one point Everett like thinks then the answer to what's going on might actually be then it's actually the Soviet, then it's like them sort of interfering and like sort of like ascending on the town, really, this small town. So that was obviously a big like part of politics at the time, because they do this thing where for a long time Everett is like the more cynical one because he just doesn't buy into what they're being told, and it's like Faye who is like, so he's like the more thinking, the more rational explanation, although actually his idea of it being the Russians isn't exactly that normal, I guess, but he's thinking more along those lines. and it's actually Faye who is like kind of hooked on this idea that it must be like a UFO, it must be like aliens. But it also touches on racial issues, because we find out then the original caller, Billy, he's actually afraid then Everett won't believe him, because he's like Mexican and he's black, and obviously they get into the whole idea of minorities. And Billy tells them like this quite elaborate story about the government trying to cover up like these testings, and just like kind of trying to like sort of play it like these night noises were coming from them. It's like this whole elaborate sort of like explanation, but Billy just makes a point of saying, yeah, I'm black, and we, you know, us like in New Mexico, us workers, we weren't believed at the time, and we were kind of like, you know, kind of just pushed into the margins. So it gets into that a little bit as well. And there's like a really powerful scene too with like the old woman who contacts them, and this is like the other person they speak to, and she has another quite bizarre story about her child being apparently abducted by UFOs. And again, that gets into a little bit, I think, of small town life and about this kind of town at the time, because she makes a comment at one point to Everett, just sort of saying that I listened to your radio show, I think you've got a lot of talent, and I hope you make it out of this town. So that's another quite interesting side, the fact that the restrictions of a small town like that, and maybe at the time politically it being a bit restricted and kind of not the most progressive maybe, but she kind of works that into her whole argument, the fact that like the government, they are suppressing like information on this thing. And Everett, it kind of finds the story far-fetched, and he doesn't really go with it at first, and when they sort of go out, because the old woman kind of like wants him to, because she believes they're up there in the sky that night, so wants him to kind of like give a message to her son, sort of thing. And he sort of like storms out, well, just leaves, but doesn't take the note, because he's like steadfast, and this isn't happening. This is just he's just like kind of a non-believer. And then things crank up again for the finale. And I have to say, actually, the when we finally get the UFO ship, which is just a small moment at the end, it's actually quite well done. I think some people have been left a bit flat by that, but it's actually fine considering how low budget this is. I think it actually looks pretty decent, and it's just a small moment at the end, and yeah, it kind of plays out how it plays out, really. I probably won't spoil it, but it's a really good film, I think, a really good debut. It's very much up my alley. I think if you enjoy throwback like UFO style stories, you'll enjoy this. But very distinct, like visually, and the use of sound. I think the soundtrack is brilliant. It's really sort of diverse, really atmospheric, like use of sound and the soundtrack. Good performances. I think they had natural chemistry. Although actually, like some of the best moments involving like the characters were actually when they were on their own in separate locations. I think when they're together they have good chemistry, but it does get maybe a bit frantic, so that could be an issue for some people. But impressive debut. I can definitely see myself rewatching this. I enjoyed it a lot. I got a lot out of it. It's got a real energy. So very good. That's my review of the Vast of the Night, I should say, which is on Amazon Prime now. And as far as rating go, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Very strong, I thought. So yeah, that's the Vast of the Night. If you've seen it, then let me know your thoughts on the comments below. You can like and subscribe if you are new to the channel. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I will be back with more movie reviews soon, and also more television movies. But thanks again, and I'll see you guys later.